She finally said, "Home." The dust had settled on everything in Copper Ridge, from the weathered boardwalks to the broken dreams of its inhabitants. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, and Eliza had done just that 6 months ago, arriving on a supply wagon with nothing but the clothes on her back and eyes that held more ghosts than a battlefield. She hadn't spoken since. Doc Henley had examined her when she first arrived, checking for injuries to her throat or tongue, but found nothing wrong. Sometimes, he'd told Martha Collins, who ran the boarding house, the soul gets hurt worse than the body, and it takes longer to heal. Martha had taken Eliza in out of Christian charity, giving her a small room above the kitchen in exchange for help with the washing and cooking. The arrangement suited them both. Martha got an extra pair of hands, and Eliza got shelter without having to explain herself to anyone. She communicated through nods and headshakes, occasionally writing brief notes when absolutely necessary, her handwriting as neat and controlled as everything else about her. The townspeople had grown accustomed to her silence. She was the ghost woman who swept the boarding house steps each morning, hung laundry that fluttered like surrender flags in the desert wind, and walked to the general store with a list written in her careful script. Children would stare as she passed, and their mothers would hush them, creating an invisible circle of space around her wherever she went. 3 miles outside town, in a valley sheltered by red rock walls, lived another kind of ghost. Cole Brennan had bought the failing Double B Ranch 2 years ago, with money earned from a decade of cattle drives that had taken him from Texas to Montana, and back again. He was 34 years old, and had decided he was tired of other people's cows and other people's problems. What he wanted was land, silence, and the right to live without explaining himself to anyone. The ranch came with 100 head of stubborn cattle, a cabin that leaked in 3 places, and a blue heeler named Scout, who had belonged to the previous owner. The old-timer had died of a heart attack during Cole's first winter there, and Scout had transferred his loyalty to Cole with the practical acceptance of a working dog who understood that survival meant adapt. Cole was a man of few words, even in the best of circumstances, but Scout made conversation unnecessary. The dog seemed to understand Cole's intentions before Cole himself did, appearing at his side when it was time to check the fence line, nudging him awake when coyotes got too close to the cattle, sitting patient as stone while Cole wrestled with the accounts by lamplight. They were a good team, the silent man and the watchful dog, and Cole had grown comfortable with their partnership. So when Scout started getting stiff in the mornings, when his breathing became labored after long days in the saddle, Cole told himself it was just age. Working dogs didn't retire, they worked until they couldn't, and then they died with dignity. That was the way of things. But Scout was suffering, and Cole couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. Patterson, the veterinarian who traveled between the scattered ranches, confirmed what Cole already knew. Scout's heart was giving out. The dog might have a few good months left, maybe less, and those months would be best spent somewhere he could rest, somewhere he wouldn't feel obligated to work himself to death. "You could put him down," Patterson said, stroking Scout's graying muzzle. "It would be kinder than letting him fade away." Cole considered it. A bullet would be quick, clean, the way Scout would want it if he could choose. But something held him back, some stubborn hope that there might be another way. That's when Martha Collins mentioned the strange woman boarding with her. Cole had come to town for supplies, and Martha had cornered him outside the feed store with the determined look of a woman on a mission. She'd been watching him load 50-pound sacks of grain onto his wagon when she approached, her hands clasped in front of her apron. "Cole Brennan, I've got something to say to you." Cole touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, it's about that dog of yours. I heard from Doc Patterson that he's not doing well." Cole's jaw tightened. In a small town, privacy was a luxury few could afford. "Scout's fine. Don't lie to me, young man. I've seen enough hurt in my time to recognize it." Martha stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've got a woman staying with me who could use some company. She's been through something terrible, lost her voice from the shock of it, been silent for months now. I'm not looking for company, Mrs. Collins. I'm not talking about company for you, you stubborn fool. I'm talking about your dog." Martha's eyes softened. "That woman needs something to care for, something that won't expect her to talk or explain herself. And your Scout needs a place where he can rest easy, knowing he's still useful." Cole considered this, studying Martha's weathered face. He'd known her since he was a boy visiting town with his father, and she'd never steered him wrong. You think she'd take him? I think they might save each other. That afternoon Cole loaded Scout into his wagon and drove to the boarding house. The dog lay on a pile of blankets, his breathing shallow but steady, his dark eyes alert to everything around him. He'd perked up when Cole hitched the team, as if he sensed they were going somewhere important. The boarding house sat on Main Street, a two-story building with a wide porch and flower boxes that Martha tended with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything else. Cole had climbed those steps countless times as a child, lured by the promise of Martha's cookies and her endless patience for small boys with dirty hands and big dreams. Now he carried Scout up the same steps, the dog's weight substantial in his arms. Martha met them at the door, her face creased with concern and hope in equal measure. "She's in the kitchen," Martha said, leading the way through the familiar halls. "Fair warning, she might bolt. She's skittish around strangers." The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the scent of bread baking and coffee brewing. At the table near the window sat a woman Cole had glimpsed around town but never really seen. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pinned back in a simple style and hands that moved economically as she kneaded dough. When they entered, she looked up with eyes the color of deep water, and Cole felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, but it was a careful beauty, held in check like a skittish horse. Her dress was plain and practical, the kind of outfit chosen for its ability to hide rather than attract attention. When she saw Cole holding Scout, her hands stilled on the dough. "Eliza," Martha said gently, "this is Cole Brennan. He has something to ask you." Eliza's gaze moved from Cole to Scout, and something changed in her expression. The careful blankness softened into something that might have been recognition or longing. She wiped her hands on her apron and stood slowly, as if sudden movements might break the spell. Cole had prepared a speech during the ride to town, explanations about Scout's condition, and what he hoped she might do for the dog. But standing there in the warm kitchen, faced with those watchful eyes, the words seemed inadequate. Instead, he lowered Scout to the floor and watched as the dog struggled to his feet. Scout was weak, but he was still a healer, and he immediately began assessing this new person with the thorough attention of a dog bred to evaluate and protect livestock. Eliza knelt slowly, extending her hand palm up for Scout to investigate. The dog approached cautiously, sniffed her fingers, then allowed her to stroke his head. She had gentle hands, Cole noticed, the kind that promised comfort without demanding anything in return. "His name's Scout," Cole said quietly. He's not well. His heart's giving out, and he needs somewhere quiet to spend his last days. Somewhere he won't feel like he has to work." Eliza continued petting Scout, her movements deliberate and soothing. The dog's tail gave a hesitant wag, and she smiled, the first genuine smile Cole had seen from her. "He's a good dog," Cole continued. "Loyal, smart, won't give you any trouble. He just needs," Cole struggled to find the right words, "he needs someone who understands what it's like to carry something heavy." Eliza looked up at him then, and Cole saw recognition in her eyes. She understood exactly what he meant. She nodded once, a small but definite movement that said yes. Martha bustled forward with the enthusiasm of someone whose matchmaking had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. "Well, that's settled then. Scout can sleep in Eliza's room, and she can take him for walks, keep him company. It'll be good for both of them." Cole knelt beside Scout and scratched behind the dog's ears. "You be good," he murmured. "This is your new home." Scout looked at him with those knowing brown eyes, then turned to Eliza and settled down beside her chair with a sigh that sounded almost like relief. Cole left his ranch address with Martha, along with money for Scout's food and care. He told them to send word if anything changed, if they needed anything, if Scout took a turn for the worse. Then he climbed back onto his wagon and drove home, feeling strangely empty without the familiar weight of Scout beside him. The first week passed slowly. Cole found himself listening for Scout's breathing at night, looking for the dog's distinctive silhouette when he checked the cattle. The silence of the ranch felt different now, heavier somehow, as if Scout's absence had created a vacuum that nothing else could fill. On the 8th day, Martha Collins appeared at his door. "Thought you'd want to know how they're getting along," she said, settling into the chair Cole offered with the air of someone prepared for a long conversation. Cole poured coffee and waited. "That dog of yours is a miracle worker," Martha said. "First couple days, Eliza barely left her room, just sat with Scout while he slept. but then he started getting restless, wanting to go outside, and she had to take him for walks. Martha paused to sip her coffee, drawing out the suspense with the skill of a born storyteller. Yesterday I caught her talking to him. Not words, exactly, but little sounds, humming while she brushed his coat, making those soft noises people make to babies and animals. It's the first sound she's made since she got here. Cole felt something loosen in his chest. How's Scout doing? Better than anyone expected. Having a purpose agrees with him, even if that purpose is just being loved. Martha studied Cole over her coffee cup. When's the last time you came to town for something other than supplies? Don't start, Martha. I'm just saying, that girl lights up when I mention your name, and Scout perks up too, like he's hoping you might visit. Cole stared into his coffee, weighing Martha's words against his ingrained habits of solitude. She doesn't need a stranger complicating her life. Maybe not, but maybe she needs to know that not all men are. Whatever made her stop talking in the first place. 2 days later, Cole found himself driving to town with a freshly caught trout and the excuse of checking on Scout's health. He told himself it was practical concern for his dog, but he'd changed his shirt twice before leaving the ranch. He found them in the small garden behind the boarding house. Eliza seated on a wooden bench with Scout's head in her lap. The dog was clearly weaker than when Cole had left him, but he seemed content, his tail giving a lazy wag when he spotted Cole approaching. Afternoon, Cole said, removing his hat. Eliza looked up and smiled, a more confident expression than the careful politeness she'd shown before. She gestured to the space beside her on the bench, an invitation Cole accepted gratefully. They sat in comfortable silence, both focused on Scout, who had closed his eyes under Eliza's gentle stroking. The garden was peaceful, enclosed by a wooden fence, and filled with vegetables and herbs that Martha grew with the same determined efficiency she brought to everything else. Brought you something, Cole said eventually, producing the wrapped trout from his saddlebags. Figured Scout might like some variety in his diet. Eliza accepted the fish with another smile, nodding her thanks. She stood and made a gesture toward the kitchen, clearly inviting him to stay while she prepared it. Cole followed her inside, where the familiar warmth and sense of Martha's kitchen created an atmosphere of domestic comfort he'd almost forgotten existed. Eliza moved through the space with practiced efficiency, filleting the fish with skilled hands while Cole sat at the table with Scout at his feet. You cook much before you came here? Cole asked, then immediately regretted the question when Eliza's hands stilled on the knife. She glanced at him, something flickering in her eyes that might have been pain or memory. After a moment, she nodded slowly. For family? He pressed gently. This time the nod was barely perceptible, and Cole saw her swallow hard. He filed the information away. She'd had a family, people she'd cooked for. Past tense. That explained some things. My mother taught me, Cole said, offering his own history as a trade. Lost her when I was 12, but she made sure I could take care of myself first. Said a man who couldn't cook was a man who'd starve or marry for the wrong reasons. Eliza's hands resumed their work, but Cole caught the small smile that ghosted across her lips. They ate the trout in the garden while Scout dozed between them, the dogs breathing slow but steady. Cole found himself talking more than he had in months, sharing stories about the ranch, the cattle, the challenges of making a living from stubborn land and contrary animals. Eliza listened with complete attention, occasionally asking questions with raised eyebrows or tilted heads that Cole learned to interpret. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Cole knew he should leave. But Scout seemed so peaceful, and Eliza looked more relaxed than he'd seen her, and the garden felt like a sanctuary from the harsh realities that waited beyond its fence. I should go, he said finally, though he made no move to stand. Eliza shook her head and pointed to Scout, who had shifted to lie across both their feet. The message was clear. The dog was comfortable, and moving him would be cruel. So Cole stayed as darkness fell and Martha brought out a lamp, setting it on the garden table with the knowing smile of someone whose plans were working perfectly. They sat in the lamplight with Scout sprawled between them, and Cole felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the simple pleasure of shared contentment. It became a routine. Every few days, Cole would find an excuse to visit, bringing food, checking on Scout, helping Martha with repairs that were beyond her strength. Each time he stayed a little longer, talked a little more, grew more comfortable with Eliza's unique form of conversation. She was intelligent, he learned, and funny in her own quiet way. She had opinions about everything from the best way to treat sick cattle to the proper technique for making biscuits, and she expressed those opinions through elaborate gestures and expressions that Cole became adept at reading. Scout continued to decline, but slowly, peacefully, surrounded by attention and comfort. The dog seemed to understand that his job now was simply to be loved, and he performed that duty with the same dedication he'd once brought to herding cattle. Martha watched the developing friendship with satisfaction, occasionally dropping hints about how nice it would be if Eliza had more company, how lonely the boarding house could be for a young woman, how Cole seemed happier these days. Cole ignored her matchmaking attempts, but he couldn't ignore the way his heart lifted when he saw Eliza's face in the boarding house window or the way Scout's tail wagged when Cole's voice carried through the garden. Summer faded into autumn, and with it came the realization that Scout's time was drawing to a close. The dog slept more each day, ate less, struggled to make it to the garden for his daily rest in the sun. Patterson confirmed what they all knew: Scout was dying, and it was a matter of weeks, maybe days. Cole increased his visits. Unable to bear the thought of Scout dying without him, he would sit for hours with the dog's head in his lap, telling him stories about their adventures together, the cattle they'd gathered, the storms they'd weathered. Eliza would join them, her presence a quiet comfort that needed no word. On a crisp October morning, Martha found Scout in his favorite spot in the garden, his head pillowed on a pile of autumn leaves. He had died peacefully in his sleep, with the sun warming his gray muzzle and the scent of Eliza's cooking drifting from the kitchen window. Cole arrived an hour later to find Eliza kneeling beside Scout's body, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Without thinking, he knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms, feeling her grief merge with his own. They buried Scout beneath the apple tree in Martha's garden, with a simple wooden marker that Cole carved with the dog's name and the years of his life. It was a good place for a dog to rest, with the smell of earth and growing things, the sound of voices from the kitchen window, the promise that he would not be forgotten. After the funeral, Cole expected to return to his previous pattern of occasional visits. Scout was gone, the reason for his frequent trips to town buried beneath the apple tree, but he found himself reluctant to leave, unwilling to abandon the friendship that had grown alongside Scout's decline. Eliza seemed to feel the same reluctance. When Cole made motions to leave, she would find small tasks that required his attention: a loose board that needed nailing, a heavy pot that needed moving, a lamp that wouldn't light properly. He began to suspect that some of these problems were manufactured, but he didn't mind being needed. Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in snow that transformed the harsh landscape into something beautiful and strange. Cole's visits to town became less frequent as the weather worsened, but he made the trip whenever the roads were passable, drawn by the warmth of Martha's kitchen and the quiet comfort of Eliza's company. It was during one of these winter visits that everything changed. Cole had arrived to find Eliza sick with a fever that had Martha worried sick. The doctor was snowed in at a ranch 20 miles away, and Martha was beside herself with concern. "She won't stay in bed," Martha complained, wringing her hands. "Keeps trying to get up and work, stubborn as a mule. Maybe she'll listen to you." Cole found Eliza in the kitchen, swaying on her feet as she tried to knead bread dough with shaking hands. Her face was flushed with fever, her eyes bright and unfocused. When she saw him, she tried to smile, but the effort seemed to exhaust. "You need to be in bed," Cole said firmly, taking the dough from her hands. Eliza shook her head and reached for the bowl, but Cole moved it out of her reach. She glared at him with the indignation of someone accustomed to taking care of herself, then swayed dangerously. Cole caught her before she could fall, scooping her up in his arms with gentle efficiency. She was lighter than he'd expected, fragile in a way that made his chest tight with protectiveness. "Don't argue," he said, carrying her toward the stairs. "Scout would want me to take care of you." At the mention of the dog's name, Eliza's resistance melted. She allowed Cole to carry her to her room and settle her in the narrow bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin with careful hands. Her room was small and neat, furnished with just the essentials, but it felt peaceful, like a sanctuary. Cole sat beside the bed and felt her forehead with the back of his hand. The fever was high enough to be dangerous, and her breathing was shallow and quick. For 3 days, Cole barely left her side. He spooned broth between her lips, bathed her face with cool cloths, held her hand when the fever dreams made her restless. Martha helped when she could, but the older woman had the rest of the boarding house to manage, and Cole found himself unwilling to trust Eliza's care to anyone else. On the third night, when the fever finally broke, Eliza woke to find Cole asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers. In the lamplight his face looked younger, the harsh lines of solitude softened by exhaustion and concern. She studied his features in the quiet room, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the dark hair falling across his forehead, the calloused hands that had been so gentle in caring for her. This was the man who had given her Scout, who had visited faithfully through the dog's decline, who had stayed by her side when she was too sick to appreciate his presence. "Cole," she whispered, the first word she had spoken in 8 months. He woke immediately, his eyes focusing on her face, with an alertness that spoke of deep concern. "How do you feel?" "Better." The word came easier than the first, as if her voice had simply been waiting for the right moment to return. "Thank you." Cole's expression transformed, wonder and relief replacing the worry that had marked his features for days. "Your voice," came back. Eliza struggled to sit up and Cole helped her, adjusting the pillows behind her back. "I thought it might be gone forever." "What happened?" Cole asked gently. "What made you stop talking?" Eliza was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts and her courage. "I had a family, a husband, a little boy. We lived in Colorado, had a small farm." Cole waited, not pushing, letting her tell the story at her own pace. "Raiders came in the spring, men who took what they wanted and burned the rest." Her voice was steady now though her hands trembled slightly. "They killed my husband first, then my son when he tried to run. They would have killed me too, but I hid in the root cellar until they left." Cole's hand tightened on hers, and she could see the anger in his eyes, not at her, but at the men who had taken everything from her. "I couldn't talk after that, couldn't make any sound at all. The doctor in Colorado said it was shock, that it might pass with time. But months went by, and nothing changed. I sold what was left of the farm and came here to disappear." "But you spoke tonight," Cole said softly, "because of you." Eliza met his eyes, no longer afraid of what she might see there. "You and Scout, you gave me something to care about again, something worth finding my voice for." They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped in the lamplight, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. "I have to ask you something," Eliza said finally, "and I need you to be honest." Cole nodded. "Did you give me Scout because you pitied me, because Martha asked you to help the poor, broken woman?" "No." Cole's answer was immediate and firm. "I gave you Scout because I thought you might save each other, and he paused, struggling with words that had never come easily, "because from the first time I saw you, I felt like I'd been waiting for you my whole life." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of relief, not sorrow. "I felt it too, like coming home to a place I'd never." Outside, the wind howled around the boarding house, rattling windows and driving snow against the glass, but inside the small room, warmth surrounded them like a promise. "When you're stronger," Cole said, "I'd like to take you to the ranch, show you the land, the cattle, see if it feels like home to you too." Eliza smiled, the expression transforming her face from careful beauty to radiant joy. "I'd like that." They talked through the night, sharing stories and dreams, and the tentative hope that maybe, despite everything they'd lost, they could build something new together. When dawn broke over the snow-covered town, painting the world in shades of rose and gold, they were still holding hands, still talking, still discovering the miracle of connection after so much solitude. 3 months later, on a spring day when the desert bloomed with wild flowers and the air smelled of rain and new beginnings, Cole and Eliza stood before the preacher in the small church in Copper Ridge. Martha wept happy tears in the front pew, and half the town crowded into the wooden building to witness the marriage of the silent woman and the solitary rancher. As they drove away from the church toward the Double B Ranch, Eliza felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. She had visited the ranch many times during their courtship, had grown to love the red rock walls and endless sky, the sturdy cabin that Cole had expanded to include a proper kitchen and a second bedroom. But this was different. This was permanent. This was choosing to build a life in a place that was still foreign to her. The wagon rounded the bend in the road, and the ranch came into view, the cabin with its covered porch, the barn and corrals, the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. It was beautiful and welcoming, but it was Cole's home, not hers. Not yet. Cole seemed to sense her nervousness. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, and turned to face her, his eyes serious but kind. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "Not about you. Never about you." Eliza took a deep breath, trying to articulate feelings that were complex and confusing. "It's just, I've been a guest everywhere I've lived since Colorado. Martha's guest, your guest, when I visited here. I don't know how to belong somewhere again." Cole climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her down, his hands strong and steady on her waist. Instead of leading her to the cabin,
He guided her to a small fenced area beside the barn where something was moving in the shadow. "I have something for you," he said, his voice holding a note of barely contained excitement. A puppy emerged from behind a water trough, a blue heeler like Scout, but younger, smaller, all ears and enthusiasm. The pup spotted Eliza and bounded toward her, tail wagging furiously. "This is Sage," Cole said as Eliza knelt to receive the puppy's enthusiastic greeting. "She's Scout's granddaughter. I've been training her, but she needs someone special to finish the job." Eliza looked up at him, understanding flooding through her. This wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility, a role that would be uniquely hers on the ranch. Sage would be her dog, her companion, her contribution to the partnership she and Cole were building. "She's perfect," Eliza whispered, gathering the squirming puppy into her arms. Cole knelt beside them, his hand covering hers where it rested on Sage's soft fur. "I want you to know that this place, this life, it's not mine anymore, it's ours. Every decision, every change, every plan for the future, we make them together." Eliza felt the last of her anxiety dissolve, replaced by something she hadn't felt since before the raiders came, a sense of belonging, of having a place in the world that was truly hers. She looked around at the ranch with new eyes, seeing not Cole's home but their home, the cabin where they would eat meals together and plan their days, the barn where they would work side by side, the land where they would build a life based on trust and partnership, and the kind of love that grew stronger under pressure. "Home," she said, the word carrying all the weight of her journey from silence to speech, from loss to healing, from solitude to belonging. Cole's smile was radiant, and he pulled her into his arms with Sage squirming between them, the puppy's joyful energy a perfect symbol of the new life they were beginning together. As the sun set over the red rock walls of their valley, painting the sky in shades of promise and possibility, Eliza finally understood what Scout had known all along, that sometimes the best things in life came not from searching, but from staying still long enough for love to find you. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, and Sage's ears perked up in response. She would be a good ranch dog, Eliza thought, a worthy successor to Scout's legacy, and this would be a good life, built on the foundation of two wounded souls who had found healing in each other's company. "Home," the word echoed in her heart as Cole carried her across the threshold of their cabin, Sage trotting behind them with the confident air of a dog who knew exactly where she belonged. After months of silence and years of searching, Eliza had finally found her voice and her place in the world. She was home.